In this video, I will discuss the ulama in the history of Pakistan and especially their relationship with the modernists. So, I will talk about what ulama have found wanting in some of the key modernist initiatives in Pakistan, especially in constitution making, Islamic legislation, and madrasa reef. And I will also try to show that the ulama were not all the same, like some early Pakistani scholars even had modernist tendencies, and relations between ulama and modernists were not always hostile, and how the ulama benefited from government support and how their religious influence developed in Pakistan's changing political and religious environment. And I will do all this through the third chapter of Islam in Pakistan book by Qasim Zaman. And this chapter is the ulama and the state. And this chapter has 5 sections, and I will cover all sections one by one. So first is the traditionalist ulama. No religious scholar has enjoyed the stature that Shabir Ahmad Usmani did in the new state, though he died 2 years after the establishment of Pakistan. He was close to Prime Minister Liaquat Ali Khan and was informally called Sheikh al-Islam, and when he died in 1949, the next day was declared a national holiday. During the debate on the objectives resolution, Liaquat Ali Khan said people should trust scholars like Usmani, not critics who doubted Pakistan's Islamic character. Yet Usmani's vision of an Islamic polity was not quite that of the Prime Ministers. Both praised Islam's moral system, democracy, and minority rights. However, Liaquat focused on protecting Muslim culture, while Usmani clearly demanded an Islamic legal system and emphasized the model of the Rashidun caliphs. Both were not on the same page so far as the role of the religious scholars in the new state was concerned. Usmani and his colleagues believed that ulama should be recognized as the main authority on Islamic matters. The government partly accepted this by creating a subcommittee of scholars called the Board of Talimat-e-Islamiyya under the Basic Principle Committee (BPC) to guide the future constitution. They described the state's duties in broad ideal terms like to promote Islam, enforce morality, ensure justice, provide basic needs, protect non-Muslims, maintain defense, apply Sharia punishment, and create a moral society. And this was a traditional, almost medieval vision. They preferred a pious ruler elected for life like the early caliphs, and said that only Muslims could hold top offices and non-Muslims could not hold highest posts. Women were seen as mainly suited for home life, and if they entered parliament, only older women should serve, and the president must be male and morally upright according to Sharia. Now, it is easy to caricature these recommendations of the Talimat-e-Islamiyya board for its traditional romanticism, but the ulama were open to considerable flexibility. Like, they were not opposed to having the term limits for the ruler, found parliamentary system acceptable, were willing to accept minorities in legislative assemblies, and did not completely ban women from parliament, and also accepted that parliament could make new laws as long as they followed Islamic principles. So their position was maximalist in theory but negotiable in practice. The Basic Principles Committee report of 1950 rejected almost all the recommendations of Board of Talimat-e-Islamiyya, which led to a famous ulama statement in 1951 restating Islamic principles. The final BBC report in 1952 was more favorable to the ulama, but the 1956 constitution again scaled back what the modernists were willing to offer them. Still, showing pragmatism, the ulama and Islamists quickly accepted it. Even so, the ulama wanted to remind the modernist rulers that Pakistan claimed to be Islamic. Their ideal of a morally upright ruler was also an indirect criticism of leaders living un-Islamic lifestyles. The modernists were sensitive to such charges, like during the inquiry into 1953 anti-Ahmadi riots in Punjab. Scholar Amin Ahsan Islahi told judges that leaders not visibly following Islam could rightly be criticized as un-Islamic. Now we'll look at the modernist ulama. The modernists have had some allies within the ranks of the ulama. Two examples are discussed in the book: Muhammad Hanif Nadwi and Muhammad Jafar Pulwarvi, both of whom were members of the Institute of Islamic Culture in Lahore in 1950s, which was founded by Khalifa Abdul Hakim. So Hanif Nadwi was from Gujranwala, educated at Nadwatul Ulama in Lucknow, was well known for his lectures on the Quran, and was an adherent of Ahle Hadith orientation, and published a number of books on Hadith, Quran, works on Islamic law, and on Al-Ghazali, Ibn Taymiyyah, and Ibn Khaldun. Later in his life, he also served as a member of Council of Islamic Ideology. Now, his book Masla-e-Ijtihad, published in 1952, argued, echoing Shah Waliullah, that Islamic laws aim at human welfare and are understandable through reason. Like others before him, he distinguished between unchangeable ritual practices, ibadat, and social laws, muamalat, which were subject to modification in changing circumstances. Ijtihad was needed for this, which he defined following the 13th century jurist Saif al-Din al-Amidi, while 19th century Yemeni scholar Shawkani, as the exertion of one's utmost effort beyond which no further effort seems possible to arrive at the most plausible view in legal matters. For Nadwi, a true mujtahid understands Islam's whole intellectual system and its deeper purposes. He said Islam, being a complete religion, means guidance for all life and not a frozen society. He said that the Prophet himself was a mujtahid, so not just a deliverer but also its interpreter, who continuously engaged in applying it to the particular circumstances and deriving broad principles from it. Though he defended hadith authority, yet in seeing some of the Prophet's teaching as his ijtihad from revelation, it did leave the impression that they were only important as that of the ijtihad of a distinguished scholar. So Nadwi asked for a rethinking of law in modern conditions and sought the codification of a new fiqh. He argued that non-Muslims could participate in ijtihad, which meant that they too could be a part of a modern legislative assembly engaged in ijtihad. He also claimed private property as a worldly matter. Ideas similar to those of Hanif Nadwi were articulated by Muhammad Jafar Nadwi Phulwarvi. He was the son of one of the Nadwa's founders. Phulwarvi in Al-Din Yusr said Islam is meant to be easy and promotes welfare, but ulama has made it rigid. Within the foundational text, he made a distinction between universal, eternal norms and those that were of provisional nature. He also proposed a distinction between Deen and Sharia. He said that Deen was an abstraction comprising eternal values, while Sharia was an embodiment of those values and was alterable. He said, for example, the essence of the prayer is to express servitude to God, and this is Deen. But the particular manner in which it has been given expression was the Sharia, as the prayer can be performed in standing, sitting, or even lying down. Sometimes one faces the Kaaba, and sometimes it is irrespective of direction. He argued that many Quranic rules were provisional, like slavery, war, poverty laws. Instead of rejecting hudud punishments, he said that their spirit is forgiveness and avoiding harsh penalties, as shown by the Prophet and early caliphs. Using Ibn Taymiyyah's anecdote, he showed how context matters. He stressed judging people by overall character, hence indirectly defending modernists who were criticized for Western lifestyles. Now, the views of these two scholars can be dismissed simply as towing the modernist lines of argument, but their views represent serious arguments which are arrived at through careful engagement with the Islamic scholarly tradition. Their positions sought to remind their readers that the Islamic tradition was a lot more varied. At the same time, there were limits to how far they would go in backing the modernists. For example, Nadwi made it clear that the mastery of Arabic language was must for engaging in ijtihad, which Pakistani modernists lacked mostly. And now let's look at the legal reforms and how ulama reacted to those. After Pakistan's first constitution, the Commission on Marriage and Family Laws proposed reforms. It was led by Mian Abdul Rashid and strongly influenced by modernist thinker Khalifa Abdul Hakim, and the sole representative of the ulama on the commission was Ithsham al-Haq Thanvi. The report quoted Iqbal and claimed that ijtihad now meant full legislative authority. It said that Islam supports progress and that both medieval jurists and British Anglo-Muhammadan law had frozen the Sharia. Now, the commission recommended strict registration of marriages, minimum marriage age, making triple divorce valid only after 3 declarations over 3 months with court involvement, and strict limits on polygamy, requiring court approval and proof of necessity. Thanvi strongly opposed this in a long dissent, mocking the commission's lack of scholarly knowledge. He said Islam sets no minimum age, so fixing one was interference in religion. The same for charting divorce rules and restricting polygamy, which he saw as Western imitation. He accused the commission of tahrif, but Jafar Phulwarvi had already answered such objections when he argued that Sharia rules can change with social welfare and that following the Prophet's sunnah meant following purposes, not copying past practices literally. Phulwarvi had also taken a swipe at the ulama's frequent invocation of the authority of consensus, responding to the traditionalist view that the permissibility of polygamy could not be set aside since it was a matter of Muslim communities' continuous practice. He said that many long practiced Muslim customs like monarchy, harems, slavery were still un-Islamic, and polygamy can be added to this list. Ironically, the modernists themselves seem to have given greater credibility to strict views such as that of Ithsham al-Haq than they did to their own allies among the ulama. The government preferred hardliners like Thanvi, even though he was hardly the most eminent of ulama in Pakistan, as representatives, perhaps because they fit modernist stereotypes. At the end, Thanvi's critique had no effect, and in March 1961, Ayub Khan promulgated the Muslim Family Laws Ordinance, and it largely followed the Commission's proposals while specifying penalties for particular provisions. The ulama and the Islamists opposed the ordinance, as they still do. Now, Mufti Muhammad Shafi, the founder and head of Darul Uloom Madrasa of Karachi, wrote a letter to President Ayub and said that the law contradicted Quran, Sunnah, and all Sunni legal schools. Coming from a figure who had played active role in giving religious legitimacy to the Muslim League's case for Pakistan, his letter conveyed a sense of betrayal. He warned that these kind of reforms would not be tolerated by the public, which can lead to unrest. Shafi had also cooperated with the state. He served on boards. His madrasa received support, and from the early 1950s and 60s, he delivered weekly Quran talks on Radio Pakistan, which later became his 8-volume Tafsir Ma'arif al-Quran. Still, the government ignored his objections, and the letter was forwarded to Ghulam Ahmad Parvez, who wrote a defense of Family Laws Ordinance. The Family Laws Ordinance remained in effect as it does to this day. There was no popular unrest either. The second case is reform of Zial Haq's Hudud ordinances. Though the implementation of the ordinances had always lagged far behind their rhetoric, many people nonetheless had been charged with hudud offenses, especially relating to sexual crimes. Ulama had welcomed the hudud ordinances warmly. Critics frequently pointed out that they were unsuited to a modern state and that they caused great hardship to women. For instance, the ordinance relating to zina did not make clear distinction between zina and rape, with the result that a woman alleging sexual assault could find herself charged with zina if she failed to produce the requisite witnesses. These were amended during the final years of Musharraf. In 2002, a famous case was that of Zafran Bibi, who was repeatedly raped by her brother-in-law while her her husband was in jail. The resulting pregnancy was viewed by the court as proof that she had engaged in unlawful sex, and her brother-in-law was released for the lack of evidence, and she was punished of stoned to death. But there were protests and press within and outside the country. The Federal Shariat Court eventually overturned the decision in light of the new facts presented to it. Zafran Bibi's husband had come forward to say that his wife had visited him in jail and that he was the newborn's father. The National Commission on the Status of Women, headed by Justice Majida Rizvi in 2003, recommended repealing the Hudud laws, saying that they caused injustice. Under Pervez Musharraf, Parliament instead passed the Protection of Women Act 2006, moving rape cases to the penal code, making zina accusations harder to file, and protecting rape victims from being charged themselves. Religious parties and many ulama opposed the changes. The government tried to gain support from respected scholars like Mufti Taqi Usmani, son of Mufti Muhammad Shafi, and a former Sharia judge and global Islamic finance authority. Although initially consulted, he later became a major critic of this bill and offered a detailed point-by-point analysis of the bill and showed how it contravened the teachings of the Quran and Hadith, and argued that no rape victim had ever been punished by hudud courts. The language some of the ulama used to denounce the Protection of Women Act of 2006, like turning Pakistan into a free sex zone, making the country safe for rapists, illustrates the degree of their hostility to this measure and to what they see as the westernizing policy of the ruling elite. But such stridency did not mean a complete break with the government, like the MMA did not resign, though it had repeatedly threatened to do so. By the end of the next general elections in early 2008, there no longer was an alliance of the religious parties, and it was the mainstream political parties, the Pakistan People's Party and the Pakistan Muslim League, that were the big winners in those elections. The ulama's argument in favor of hudud ordinances did not remain unchallenged, like Justice Rizvi challenged how those were derived from the Quran and Sunnah. Religious intellectuals like Javed Ahmad Ghamdi tried as well to educate public opinion on the many inadequacies of the ordinances, and the Council of Islamic Ideology did the same in a report. Ghamdi's appeal in some circles scarcely matches the national and international standing that Taqi Usmani has as an authority on Islamic law. Ironically, in calling upon a team of conservative ulama to help make a case in 2006 for reforming the hudud ordinances, the government had itself lent further credibility to those who became the severest critics of this initiative. Now we'll look at the madrasa reform and how ulama reacted to that and whether it worked or not. So the need to modernize madrasas to bring them closer to the educational mainstream, to better regulate them, and to make their products useful to society and the state are familiar motives in modernist discourses on Islam in Pakistan. Ulama have seen these initiatives as seeking to undermine these institutions and dilute the purely religious instruction. Major reform attempts took place in the early 1960s, in the late 1970s, and in the aftermath of September 11, 2001. In 1962, a government committee including Mufti Muhammad Shafi proposed adding English, math, science, and social studies to madrasa studies while cutting unnecessary and out-of-date non-religious materials, which meant medieval discussions of natural science and also philosophy and logic, and focusing more on Quran and Hadith. Ironically, the very effort to find space for modern knowledge was premised on a sharp divide between religious and non-religious. In 1979, under General Ziaul Haq, another reform plan was put forward to bring madrasas under government control and also to integrate the public school or general curriculum into the madrasas. The degrees awarded by madrasas were to be recognized as equivalent of university diplomas, as the university's own master's curriculum in Arabic and Islamic studies was to be the same as that of the madrasas. Since the late 1950s, madrasas belonging to different sectarian orientations have had their own boards to coordinate their educational activities throughout the country. The 1979 report sought to establish a single national organization to oversee those boards, thereby to further facilitate the standardization of madrasa education. After September 11, 2001, General Pervez Musharraf reform focused strongly on registration and state monitoring of madrasas. Unregistered ones were technically illegal, and model madrasas were planned where secular learning could be fully integrated with the religious sciences. Even in this changed atmosphere, however, the government was not notably successful in implementing its state policy, that is, in shutting down madrasas that failed to register with it. The issue resurfaced after the 2014 Peshawar school massacre, where over 130 children were killed, when the National Action Plan again stressed regulation. That resolve too has yielded uncertain results so far. As might be expected, many ulama opposed to these reforms. For example, the Deobandi scholar Muhammad Yusuf Ludhianvi in 1979 said that the products of such a system would be useless equally for religion and the world and would create only loyal government servants. Though unexpected, madrasas have in fact adapted themselves to government initiatives and reforms. Like Taqi Usmani's Dar al-Ulum Karachi already run primary and secondary schools with public curricula, and in 2016 madrasa boards agreed to teach the same high school curriculum as the national board. This adaptation actually benefited ulama. Degree equivalence opened jobs in school and the universities. Scholars like Taqi Usmani, Mukhtar Allah Haqqani and others earned university university degrees and even PhDs. Both a son and a nephew of Taqi Usmani have also earned PhDs from Pakistani universities. Ordinary Pakistanis often combine religious and modern education. The desire of segments of the population for a deeper grounding in Islam than is provided to them by the mandatory school courses in Islamic studies has sometimes brought them to madrasas for part-time religious instruction. Though ordinary believers are not classifiable as ulama, Islamists, modernists, or Sufis, they do tend to follow various orientations like Shi'i, Deobandi, Brelvi, Ahl Hadith. But even when they incline toward one orientation, many tend to combine ideas of varied provenance, just as they would combine religious with the worldly education. Ulama often lament divisiveness in the community, yet they have taken the existence of rival doctrinal orientations for granted. Many, perhaps most, ordinary educated believers are closer to the modernist view than they are to the ulamas, but they do recognize the ulama's authority in particular areas of their lives and turn to them for guidance. However, the ulama's madrasas are not the only institutions providing Islamic education. There are other Islamist organizations having their own madrasas, but their scale is much more limited. Like, since the early 1980s, an educational and religious movement called the Minhaj al-Quran has come to spawn a substantial number of schools across the country to bridge the gap between traditional Islamic and modern education and to reform people's lives on individual level. This is led by Muhammad Tahir al-Qadri. Since the mid-1990s, the movement called Al-Huda, led by Farhat Hashmi, has also organized study groups focused on the Quran for middle and upper middle class urban women to cultivate a pious personhood. This movement is presented as of non-sectarian Islam. Though such movements challenge traditional ulama authority, they also foster a kind of religiosity that other traditionalists can build on. Now we'll look at the growing number of madrasas in Pakistan. Madrasas in Pakistan have grown steadily, often very fast, even though officials like Pervez Musharraf later questioned how so many graduates could find mosques jobs. This growth happened because madrasas fill gaps the state fails to cover. The government has never provided education for everyone despite the promises of doing so. In 2013 to 14, about 29% of primary age children were out of school and around 1.8 million studied in madrasas, likely an undercount. Public schools stagnated, and in conflict areas like Khyber Agency, where militants destroyed 85 schools, over 56% of children attended private schools or madrasas. Madrasas attract families because they offer free education, food, and lodging, and graduates can work as imams, teachers, or start their own mosques and schools. By 2009, some even offered courses in banking, journalism, and computer science. State policy also indirectly fueled growth, especially under Zia al-Haq from 1980. Zakat funds were distributed to religious institutions, encouraging new madrasas, while the Afghan jihad and refuge influx expanded frontier madrasas. Some linked to the war effort. Places like Dar al-Uloom Haqqaniya later produced Taliban leaders. Even earlier, officials saw ulama and madrasas as tools against regional separatism and communism. Economic change affected the growth too. Gulf oil wealth in 1970s and 80s created migrant labor opportunities. About 10 million Pakistanis benefited, with income rising 600 to 800%, expanding the lower middle class that supported mosques and madrasas as markers of new religious identity. The author has presented the charts in the book which explain the growth of madrasa in different times due to different factors. Barelvi madrasa's growth was partly due to rural background immigrants who were mostly Barelvis, and also better reporting after their board revived in 1974. Deobandis have the most amount of madrasa's students and adherents. It was and is due to different factors. Deobandi influence was strengthened by figures like Shabir Ahmad Usmani, Mufti Muhammad Shafi, and Taqi Usmani, plus the Tablighi Jamaat and strong publishing traditions. Taqi Usmani's 2010 India visit shows the continuing appeal of the ulama's traditionalism in the contemporary world, who can bridge classical learning with modern issues, and Mufti Taqi Usmani have been able to do so with considerable skill. And that is the end of this video. Until now, we have talked about different orientations within traditionalists and then the modernists in pre-partition India, and we have done the same for modernists and now for ulama in Pakistan. And the next one we'll look at the Islamists in Pakistan, especially discussing the topic of sovereignty of God.